What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another PS4 and PS5 Jailbreak news update. Once again, we're going to be diving into some PS4 topics in this video, which I haven't done for quite some time. But yeah, we do finally have some news for the PS4 to discuss. But first of all, let's go ahead and dive into some of the PS5 stuff, starting with our ability to run our PS5 game dumps. There's been a few updates to this. Of course, I've already done a video that goes over the method that Lightning Mods created to allow you to load your PS5 game dumps as the raw game files, because we're not able to create PS5 fake packages yet, so we can't load the game dumps in the same way that we do with our PS4 game dumps. So Lightning Mods has created a version of Items Flow, the Items Flow Homebrew app, that is designed to run on the PS5, that has the ability now to load your PS5 game dumps. Now, the application's not been released yet. There's a lot of people asking about when it's going to be released. It will be released eventually. It's not going to be kept private. The only reason why it's not released right now is because we're still testing a lot of game dumps to see which ones work and which ones don't, and if there's anything we can do to fix some of the ones that are not working. Plus, the method in Items Flow hasn't been refined yet to allow you to easily switch between your different game dumps. So at the moment, it's kind of tricky. So once that's all done and it's, all been streamlined, then there'll be a release of Items Flow so that everybody can do this. But at the moment, we're still very much in the testing phase. So originally, it only seemed like digital game dumps were actually working, because that's most of the ones that were initially tested were game demos that were dumped from the digital copies. Like, for example, the Matrix demo, the Resident Evil Village Maiden demo, as well as the Abandoned demo and a couple of others. There was also the Grand Theft Auto 3 Definitive Collection. That was all digital and those were all working. However, the physical copies that we tried were not working at the time. However, we've managed to find a few physical copies now that do work. So I guess we were just getting unlucky with the physical copies that we were trying. So I tried Ghost of Tsushima, the Director's Cut, the PS5 disc version. I dumped that and tried to run it, and I was able to get it running. I posted a little Twitter teaser of that a few days ago, where you can see I've got the game running. Now, the game does work, but you can also see that there are some problems, like we get a couple of NP errors when launching the game, which are probably related to the trophy data or perhaps the save files. And we also have issues where there's no loading screen or anything. It's just a black screen until it eventually loads into the game. But once it does load into the game does run just fine so far. I haven't noticed any problems. And also, Echo Stretch was able to get Kernel running, and he actually got version 1.016 running on his 4.03 system. Now, 1.016 is an update that normally requires firmware 4.50 in order to get it working, so it will not run on 4.03 normally. So I believe what happened is Not So Typical Gamer was the one who dumped the game on 1.016 on his 4.50 system or 4.51 system, and then sent the dump to Echo Stretch, and Echo Stretch was able to get it running on his 4.03 console, which basically makes this the first backport, the first working backport for your PS5 games. So that means once we're able to get the PS4 fake package enabler working on older firmwares like 3.0, then we'll be able to take some newer games that normally require firmware 4.50 or 4.51, and people on those firmwares can dump those games, and then people on the older firmwares like 3.0 will be able to run them as a backport. So that'll be good for people running lower firmwares as well. So that is pretty handy. Now, the game list was leaked out by Heinbrid. I believe maybe it was posted on Dark Software at some point, but this is basically the Google Sheet that we've been updating with all the games that we've been testing so far. So I added Dying Light 2 to this list, which unfortunately crashes, and obviously Ghost of Tsushima, although there's been a couple of other ones that have been added. I've also added Ghost of Tsushima, the Director's Cut version, which is playable, and then Kena was also added, which is also playable. But you can see all the other ones here as well. So all of the Grand Theft Autos, all of the demos that are working. And then you can see some of the ones that do not work right now, like Elden Ring. Network test crashes, which doesn't really bode well for the full game. Also, Astro's Playroom crashes. RE8 Maiden demo is playable, which may be a good sign that the full game might also be playable. And then Returnal calls an abort, as well as Subnautica and Tormented Souls. So we're having a few issues with some of those games as well. So that gives you kind of a general idea of the ratio of how many games work versus how many games don't work that have been tested so far. So that's pretty much where we're at right now with the game dumps. Lightning Mods is working once again on Items Flow, trying to get it so that it's easier to switch between different game dumps without overwriting your save files and such. So that stuff is still being worked on. And once that's all been streamlined and we've got a few more games tested, then I'm sure it will eventually be released. Now, talking about running different games, we do have a sponsor. World of Warships Legends is a free-to-play naval combat game where you get to command iconic warships from history and battle it out in epic 3v3, v3, v3 and 9v9 matches. Now, I've never been great at fast-paced FPS games, so World of Warships Legends is definitely more my style, where it focuses on tactics like calculating where your shots are going to land and picking the right ships, weapons and upgrades to suit your playstyle and strategy. It's pretty addicting once you get into it. There's loads of content with 11 different nations to command, and they keep things fresh by updating the game every 5 weeks with new ships, missions and upgrades. Unlike Lapy's River Raid, the game is available on the latest firmware for the PS4 and PS5, so there's no need for a jailbreak. And of course you can also find it on Xbox One and Xbox Series platforms. There's also some exclusive Black Friday deals on offer, with more dropping on the 24th of November, where you can get your hands on some exclusive black ships like the Tier 5 Dunkirk, Tier 6 Asashio, Tier 7 Tirpitz, and the legendary Napoli. You can also find discounts on XP boosters, commander crates and more, with up to 80% off in some cases. So don't miss out on these deals, use my link in the description below and start sinking ships in World of Warships Legends today. Okay, so moving on to our 7.61 exploit. So if you're not familiar, we do in fact have a userland exploit now for firmwares on PS5 up to firmware 7.61, which is basically just the Flow's Blu-ray drive exploit, the BD Jailbreak. We have access to that here on up to 7.61 because the Flow released a tweak that could be made to the exploit to allow it to work on firmwares up to 7.61. Now, this is just a userland exploit at the moment, which is really why I've not been covering this very extensively, because at the end of the day, we're not really going to be able to do any of the stuff that we can do on 3.0 to 4.51 on 7.61 until we have a kernel exploit that we can chain with the Flow's Blu-ray drive exploit. But hopefully that will be coming. The Flow has talked about some bugs that he reported to Sony, and we're waiting to see if those get disclosed. However, what has happened is we have Hammer83, who has been releasing some useful things for this exploit, just for the userland portion right now. So there's a jar loader that has been released, which also now includes an FTP server payload that can be sent as a jar file, which can allow you to access your PS5's file system over the network through FTP on 7.61 and lower. Now, because it's a userland exploit right now, it's only giving you access to a small portion of the file system on the PS5, which is going to be the kind of the app0 directory, the directory of the currently running app, which will be the disk player app. So you only have access to that portion of the file system, the part where the disk app is running within. That's all you have access to. You don't have access to the root of your hard drive because of the fact that we are not able to chain it with a kernel exploit and get more access. So that's where we are right now, but this will all become useful once we have a kernel exploit to chain with this. We'll then be able to open things up and get a hopefully similar level of functionality to what we have on 3.0 to 4.51, all the way up to firmware 7.61, which would be great. We're just missing that vital piece of a kernel exploit right now, but it is looking promising that we could see one in the near future. So anyway, just wanted to give you a little update there on the progress on 7.61. Moving on to something that affects the PS4 and the PS5 here, we have Al-Azif's DNS addresses. So Al-Azif's DNS addresses to block system updates have been down for quite some time now, probably about 2 or 3 weeks, and this is pretty unfortunate because a lot of people are relying on these DNS addresses, or were relying on these DNS addresses to block system updates and game updates for the PS4 and PS5. Now on the PS4, these DNS addresses are not that important because you have Gold Hen, which has an update blocker built in, and once you've ran Gold Hen once, that update blocker will be enabled, so when you reboot your PS4, you'll still have the updates blocked. If it tries to download an update, it will fail. But on PS5, it's much more vital to have a method to block system updates because the update blocker is built into ETA Hen, and any update or payloads get reset after a reboot, so you'll still be able to download and install a system update after you reboot the system. So it's very important that you have some other method to block updates properly. So the good news is that this should be coming back. Al-Azif says here that tests all went good. DNS should be up by Monday, which should be the day that I'm releasing this video. So hopefully the DNS addresses may be back up by the time this video goes out. If not, hopefully later today, they will be back up. There's also Nomadic's DNS that you can use in the meantime, which will block system updates. So that's one option if Al-Azif's DNS, if there's any problems with this and it doesn't come back up today, you can use Nomadic's DNS instead. But anyway, hopefully everything goes good and Al-Azif's DNS will be back up hopefully today. So anyway, moving on to some PS4 news. So I know a lot of people have been kind of upset that I've not really been doing any PS4 videos for quite some time. I think my last dedicated PS4 video was in September, late September. So it's been about 2 months since I've actually done anything for PS4. And that's mainly because a lot of the developments have been happening on PS5. There's been a lot of stuff happening for PS5, whereas PS4 has kind of been left by the wayside. Now, the reason for that is most of the Homebrew developers are all trying to port their Homebrew, their PS4 Homebrew, over to the PS5, which means there's little time for them to update the PS4 version right now. So things like, obviously, Lightning Mods, who's working on items flow in the Homebrew store. You've got Sistro, who appears to be working on some kind of PS5 debug payload, as well as some shell UI stuff. Obviously, these are the main developers who are making Homebrew for the PS4, and unfortunately, they're all busy trying to port things over to PS5 right now. But hopefully, once they're finished doing that and they've got their PS4 Homebrew as functional as it can be on the PS5, we'll start seeing updates for their Homebrew in general, which should also hopefully add some new stuff for the PS4 version as well. And we'll start getting more regular updates to PS4 stuff. Now, in terms of new jailbreaks, we also have the exploit developers or hackers, whatever you want to call them. They are also working on trying to exploit the PS5 rather than the PS4, it seems. Now, this isn't too much of a big deal because a lot of kernel exploits, any new vulnerabilities that get discovered in the PS5, could also affect the PS4. We've definitely seen this. In most cases, it's happened. If you look at the 6.72 jailbreak that we got for the PS4, that kernel exploit is the kernel exploit that was reintroduced in the PS5 and firmware 3.0, and it's the same kernel exploit we're using to jailbreak the PS5 right now on 3.0 to 4.51. So that's a kernel exploit that affects both the PS4 and the PS5. If you look at the 9.00 kernel exploit that we're using to jailbreak the PS4 right now, that one also exists in the PS5, although it can't really be exploited in the same way as PS4, but it does exist in both systems. And then also the Blu-ray drive exploit from the Flow also affects the PS4 as well as the PS5 in some ways. A lot of the vulnerabilities affect both systems, so any new discovery, any new kernel exploit that's discovered in the PS5, there is always a good chance that it could also be present in the PS4 as well, and that could result in some kind of new exploit for the PS4, especially since the PS4 is less secure because of it being an older system and it doesn't use a hypervisor, it doesn't have all these modern security techniques that the PS5 incorporates. So it's more likely that we could get a jailbreak for a PS4 from some new discovery, even if the discovery was ultimately made on the PS5 initially. So yeah, there's definitely still hope for some new exploits for the PS4, but I'm not going to lie, development has definitely slowed down on PS4 over the past few months. If it hadn't, I'd still be making PS4 videos, but for now anyway, there hasn't really been a lot going on right there, but things should definitely pick up once Homebrew developers are done porting all of their stuff over to the PS5. But not to worry, we do actually have a couple of other PS4 updates to get into, and these seem to be coming right now from the PS4 repair scene rather than the typical, PS4 modding scene. Now, this is from Ab Carino, who is the one who created the PS4 Syscon writer, or is one of the main developers behind the PS4 Syscon writer, which makes it easier to, of course, do the revert method to revert your firmware on the PS4. Got a full tutorial that covers that entire process, by the way. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. I'll leave it in the description. But yeah, anyway, so what Ab Carino has done here is he's just gone ahead and posted publicly the method for unlimited game sharing or unlimited account activation. Now, this is a method that I've known about for a long time, but I've not known exactly how it's done. This has been possible over several years. I've had people talking about this years ago who have messaged me saying they sent their console into some repair shop where they said that they could install a bunch of games on their system for them, and then they got it back and they're on the latest firmware and they have like 50 games that they can run, and they were wondering if I knew how on earth they were doing it. I had a general idea, but I wasn't 100% sure. So this details the entire method right here. Step 1, add PSN accounts with games to your console and activate it as a primary console and download all games that you want from those accounts. Power off your console and dump your SPI flash, which is your NOR flash, and your syscon, and then remove the current HDD and install a new one and reinstall the same firmware that you had again. Step 4, add same PSN accounts that you had added in the first step and deactivate this console from all accounts now. Power off the console again and restore your SPI flash and syscon dumps that you had made in step 2. Replace the new hard drive with your original one, very important. Power on the console again, and tada, you have activated PSN games without counting your console to those PSN accounts used. So to try and put all that into perspective, normally when you activate an account on your console and set it as your primary console, then all the licenses that are linked to that account will be valid on that console while it's activated, and you can download games and run them. However, if you activate that account on another console and make that your primary console, then those licenses on the first console will be revoked. They'll now be linked to the new console. So the way this works is it allows you to basically have unlimited account activations so that you can have, multiple consoles that are all linked to the same account and all have access to run those games with those licenses. So pretty cool method. Unfortunately, it does require reading and writing the syscon. If it was just the NOR chip, it would be perfect because that's pretty easy, but reading and writing to the syscon's quite tricky. It's not for the, unless you really know what you're doing in terms of soldering, it's not really going to be accessible for most people, unfortunately, which is probably why this has only really been done by repair shops previously. However, it's good that the method is now out there, and for anybody that's willing to do it, you could actually get games copied from many different systems. So good stuff there from Abcarino. He also posted a way of fixing the no Blu-ray drive issue where you can't update your firmware if you have a broken Blu-ray drive. So another couple of updates for the PS4. We also got the release of a new Homebrew app from Lapy, PS4 Kernel BTTF, which is a utility to set the internal clock and date/time. So this is basically a way of setting the kernel clock. Unfortunately, it's only for firmware 5.05 because the kernel clock function was removed or changed in higher firmwares than 5.05. I was really hoping that this Homebrew app would be some kind of new way of actually setting the kernel clock on higher firmwares like 9.00, but it is only for 5.05. There was a method where you could set the kernel clock using the debug servers for a while. However, Sony caught on to that and removed it, so now you can't sync your clock with the debug servers or with the official servers, so there's no way to sync the kernel clock right now. So if your CMOS battery dies, for example, and your clock gets reset, you cannot set the clock back to normal, you cannot resync it, and some kind of kernel clock payload that would work on 9.00 or Homebrew app would be fantastic, but unfortunately this is only for 5.05, so it's basically replacing the React PS Plus payload for 5.05, which would allow you to switch your kernel clock between the current date and time and 2013, which would allow you to reactivate old licenses that had expired, so you could re-access games. So that was, the main reason for React PS Plus, but it would only allow you to switch your kernel clock between 2013 and the current date and time. However, this kernel clock Homebrew app from Lapy, which is styled in a kind of Back to the Future theme, which is pretty cool, actually allows you to set the clock to any specific date and time that you want. So it is definitely an improvement over React PS Plus. However, it's just unfortunate that it only works on firmware 5.05. And lastly, for the PS4, we also got some updates to a couple of media apps. So the Disney Plus app and the YouTube app have got new dumped versions released that have the PSN check removed, so you can use them on a jailbreakable PS4 as long as you have an internet connection. Obviously for Disney Plus, you'll need an actual Disney Plus account to use the application. But besides that, you'll have access to those apps now. So that's a couple of new media apps that are now available. We did have access to the YouTube app before, but it was an older version. So we now have a newer version available. So that is pretty handy as well. So that's basically it for this update for PS4 and PS5. Hope you guys enjoyed it or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And once again, I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.